I want to talk this morning, and some of you might chuckle a little bit, but about how the world really works. And we think we know how it works, but I think it works in a way that maybe we're not very cognizant of. Because if we don't understand how it really works, we're going to continue to operate from a faulty frame of reference. And the result of that faulty frame of reference is that we're going to continue to struggle with battles that will not end. And if you've had those battles in life, if you lived with struggles that are ongoing and persistent, day after day, month after month, year after year, you might be looking for solutions that will never come. And it could be, not all the time, but it could be that we don't really understand how the world works, and we're approaching it and the struggles and battles that we go through in life from a faulty frame of reference. When we understand this foundational principle of how the world really works, we're able to approach struggles and battles appropriately. See if this isn't true. Many of us try to clean up the messes of our circumstances. And the more we try to clean up the messes of our circumstances, the more messy it becomes. And we try over and over and over, time after time, year after year. And perhaps if we changed our understanding of the way the world works, we might change the way we approach the battles and struggles that we're in. Does that make sense? Now, the danger in preaching this message is that you're going to assume that I am saying that what we're going to talk about is the reason for all your messes. And that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying it could be the reason for some of them. We've already established in this series, Ephesians 6:4, that says we don't wrestle primarily and solely against flesh and blood, but against rulers and authorities and powers of this dark, unseen world. And we saw last week how the devil works to really attack us in some pretty specific ways that shows up in our physical world. So the evil, unseen world starts to have an effect on the seen world, and it causes us troubles and struggles and problems. But there's also another source of our troubles. Because our troubles don't simply come from one singular source. And this might be some tough theology for some of you to understand and to come to terms with. But it's biblical, and I want to explain this to us a little more fully. So, we're going to start in 2 Chronicles Chapter 15. That's way back in the Old Testament. 1 and 2 Samuel tells a story of King Saul and King David and the other kings that come after him. 1 and 2 Kings, about all these kings that go through the nation of Israel. And then 1 and 2 Chronicles kind of recaps what happened in 1 and 2 Samuel and 1 and 2 Kings. So in 2 Chronicles, the writer's kind of recapping. It's historical. It's a retelling of what has occurred in the past. And so this is what 2 Chronicles 15 says. For a long time, starting in chapter 3, Israel was without the true God, without a priest to teach, and without the law. For a long time, year after year after year, Israel was without some very, very, very necessary things. They were without the true God. It means they were without the one God, and they were without the truth of that one God. It says they were without a teaching priest, and they were without the law. We're going to unpack that in just a moment. I just want to set the stage for what so that you will realize what they were without. In those times, there was no peace to him who went out or to him who came in. For great disturbances afflicted all the inhabitants of the lands. They were broken in pieces. Nation was crushed by nation and city by city. For a long time, they were without the one true God. They were without a teaching priest. They were without law, the law. And there was no peace when a man would go out, when he would come in. Nation was against nation and city was being torn apart. Does that sound at all like present day? For a long time, they were without the true God. It means they had religion, and they were still going to church. They had a God, but it wasn't the true God. Nor did they have the truth of that God. They had religion without relationship, and they had religion without truth. It seems to me today that there are many in the land that have religion. I talk to people all the time who are spiritual people. But it seems to me today that many of them have rejected truth. That there is a truth. See, today we have my truth and you have your truth, and my truth can be different than your truth, and I don't have the right to tell you your truth is wrong, and you don't have the right to tell me my truth is wrong because it's my truth and it's your truth. And when that's the culture, there's no truth. For a long time, they were without the true God, and they were without teaching priests. They had preachers, they just weren't saying anything worth saying. And they were without the law. There was no objective binding standard by which to pronounce right nor wrong. They're without the law. See, people don't like the law. Because once we establish there is a law, that means we establish, therefore, there could be lawbreakers. Do you understand? This is why I want to have my truth and allow you to have your truth. And you can't tell me my truth is wrong, and I can't tell you your truth is wrong. Because if my truth says I'm not a lawbreaker, guess what? I'm okay. But if there is a truth, and that truth says that I am wrong, then guess what? I'm not okay. And our culture, and we have become so fragile and so weak and so tepid that we fall apart if someone tries to tell us we're wrong. And so I'd rather have no truth. And my truth be my truth and your truth be your truth. That way we can all be right. You understand? Please understand this. If there's no wrong, there's no need for mercy nor grace. You know what mercy does? Mercy withholds from us what we rightly deserve. In a bad sense. And grace gives us what we don't deserve in a good sense. And if there's no law and no wrong, it removes both mercy and grace. Because how are you going to withhold from me what I deserve if I'm never wrong? And how are you going to give to me beyond what I've earned if I'm never wrong? See, mercy and grace are only available for lawbreakers. And the greater the lawbreaker I am, the more grace I get. That's what Paul says. So we need the law so that grace is possible. It's okay to say that there is a truth. And it's okay to say that I'm a lawbreaker, because it puts me in a position to receive both mercy and grace. So the results of no law, no teaching priests, without the true God, there was no peace. In those times there was no peace to him who went out or came in. There was no peace. When the individual left home and went to work, there was no peace there. Does that sound familiar? And there was no peace when he came back home. Means there was personal conflict all around, and people were living in conflict with each other. There was no peace to him. It means there was conflict with myself. There was conflict in here. I wonder how many of us live in conflict with ourselves. When we don't really like who we see in the mirror, we put our head on the pillow at night and think, oh, if only I would have. I wish this were different about me. I wish I would have in the past done this different. There's just conflict. And it says there's conflict with each other. When I leave home, when I go out there, just the world is full of idiots. I don't know how to say it. Right? You ever felt that way? They're just stupid people. And there's conflict all around. I go to my work and just idiots all around. And I work for an idiot. My staff doesn't say that about me, but you know how it goes. It seems wherever I go out there, it's just terrible. So at least I get to come home to my place of solace and comfort and appreciation, where there's no strife and there's no stress, right? Right. That's how it is for all of us, right? Even the Bible says even when they came home, there was conflict. For some, our marriage, it's in turmoil, and it's been that way for years. And there's fighting with your spouse, and there's dissatisfaction in each other, disengagement, where the connection is sporadic at best. In your home, you're raising those children, and they're just rude and ungrateful. And all they know is what they don't have, and all they know about you is what you don't allow. And it's a fight to get them to behave. It's a fight to get them to be respectful. You want to go just one day without getting a call from somebody about them. Does that sound like today? There was no peace. At home, at work, it didn't matter. Not only was there personal conflict, there was cultural conflict. See if this doesn't sound like today. Nation crushing nation. I mean, the world's in turmoil. Does that sound like today? Civil unrest, city against city. Cultural conflict. Societal conflict. It seems at this point in 2 Chronicles 15, as they're telling what has happened, that whether it's personal, interpersonal, cultural, national, the world's a mess. Right? So what have we learned so far? That we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against rulers and authorities and powers, right? It seems like the devil's running amok, doesn't it? You want to know why things are getting so bad? There's no doubt that we have looked at our world, looked at our personal lives, looked at the society around us, and thought it is out of control. How did it get this bad? Let me give you another reason why it got this bad. For God troubled them with every sort of distress. You want to blame somebody? Blame God. It would make sense if we said, and all this turmoil was because the devil, that preaches. But to say all this turmoil was propagated upon them by God himself, well, isn't God supposed to be loving? Like, I don't like that God. Sometimes our mess is because of the evil one. I don't want to make light of that. That is the truth. And we've spent 2 weeks looking at that. But sometimes our mess and your mess is God initiated. Is God propagated. Is God originated. How's that feel? No peace, family disintegration, cultural conflict by God's hand. Does that sit well? You got one honest person. See, if we don't realize how the world works, we try to clean up all those messes. But if God is your problem, only God is your solution. Do you understand? Earth can't fix heaven if the problems we experience originate in heaven. And if God is the cause, only God is the cure. God troubled them with every kind of distress. Some of us have been fighting against the devil when God says, hello, it's me that is your problem. See, the spiritual always precedes the natural. The heavenly always governs the natural. And if the issue on earth that you're going through, that I'm going through, that we're going through, originates in heaven, trying to fix it in earth is a waste of time. Some of us have assumed that every one of our troubles and problems and struggles have been at the hand of an evil one. And we've tried real hard with everything on earth to fix it. If the issues on earth have originated in heaven, we need heaven to come to earth to fix earth. And if we don't understand this principle, if we miss this, we will spend all our resources, all our energy, all our money on earth fixing a problem that originated somewhere else. And that is why day after day, month after month, year after year, it's the same battle over and over and over and over and over. And that could be why why we're wearing ourselves out. Trying to fix it and it doesn't work. God troubled them. See, we misunderstand how the word works and we're using the wrong resources because we don't understand the origination. Does this make sense so far? It's a little distressing so far. Do you want to know why God troubled them?
Why not?
No, yeah, I mean, I already know. It don't matter to me. I don't got to tell you. Here's the thing. If you know why God troubled him, then maybe you know what you can avoid so he won't trouble you, right? I mean, think about it. See, we have to understand the nature of God to understand this troubling of God. So here's what I mean. You want to know why it seems like there's two gods of the Bible? There's the angry God of the Old Testament and the loving God of the New Testament. Doesn't it seem like that sometimes? Like if you're not aware, it seems like there's two different gods. Like he's got a split personality. It's kind of, bipolar at times. Let me explain to you why it seems like there's two different gods. An angry God of the Old Testament and a loving, nice God of the New Testament. There's not two gods. There's only one God. It has to do with the wrath of God. When God troubles people. See, in the Old Testament, we lived with and dealt with the active wrath of God. Where God directly dealt with people on an individual basis. That's where things like the flood. That's where there are things like when the earth would open up and swallow people. That's when God would bring curses down and just absolutely annihilate people. It was brutal. Because there's this thing called sin, and sin is any violation of God's divine standard. And because God is just, and because God is holy, his standard must be upheld. And his standard of perfection demands punishment when this standard is violated. He's just. So in the Old Testament, there was no intermediary between God and people. And so people bore the brunt of the active wrath of God against sin. Do you understand? Because there was no buffer. It was God and people. And so what we saw was not a mean God. What you see in the Old Testament is a just God whose standard demands punishment when it's violated. And because there was no buffer intermediary between God and people, people bore the brunt of the active wrath of God that was poured out on mankind in sin. Do you understand? So what happened? Well, what happened was a man named Jesus, the God-man. Fully God and fully man. Fully God so that there's perfection protected. Fully man so punishment could be espoused. And God poured his active wrath on Jesus when he was on the cross. Galatians 3:13 is very clear. It says Jesus became the curse for us. See, with the death of Jesus on the cross, God's relationship with humanity changed. There's not two gods. There were just two different ways he related to humankind. And the relationship that shifted between God and man was from the active wrath of God to the passive wrath of God. In 2 Corinthians 5, we're told that through the death of Jesus on the cross, the world was reconciled to God. So God no longer had to pour out his active wrath on humanity for sin. God took his entire active wrath for every sin every person ever committed, will commit in the future, and poured his active wrath out on Jesus on the cross. And now his relationship with us changed. And because God's active wrath was poured out on Jesus on the cross, now we experience not the active wrath of God, now we experience the passive wrath of God. Here's what I mean. For those of us who want to live apart from God, in violation of his divine standard, we will experience the passive wrath of God. His active wrath was poured out on Jesus. But we will still bear the brunt of the passive wrath of God. Here's what I mean. Romans 1. 3 different places in Romans 1. Talks about God gave them over. God gave them over. God gave them over. They want to live apart from my standard. That's fine. I will give them over to what that means. See, those of us who want to live apart from God's standard and laws, he will give you over to your own life. And the consequences of living contrary to his standard. He'll let you go. God will release you to a life without him. Now, while God still loves you, he will release you. And we misunderstand God's love when we think that, well, he loves me, so I can do what I want and he will protect me. No. He loves you, yes, but if you want to live apart from his divine standard, he will let you go. And the place where God is and the place where you want to live outside of his standard, this space in between is filled with consequence. Do you understand? Distress of every kind. Struggles of every kind. Troubles of every kind. It's not that God says, I will now punish you. He's saying, I'm going to let you go. And what you will experience in this space is the passive wrath of God, i.e. consequence. See, when we choose to walk away from God and live contrary to his standard, he lets us walk away because he's a gentleman. And there's a space that's created between God and us. And in that space are consequences, which is the passive wrath of God. God says, when you choose to live contrary to my will and my standard, you will incur consequences. Not because I'm mad at you. Not because I'm condemning you, because now therefore there is no condemnation for those who are in Christ. There's just the passive wrath of consequence. So perhaps, remember I said not every time, just perhaps, much of the troubles and struggles in our lives is not because the devil is attacking us. Perhaps much of the troubles and struggles in our lives are because of the passive wrath of God. Consequences of living outside of his standard. Do you understand? See, it's a lot easier for us to say, oh, no, it's the devil. I'm good. I'm good. Because my truth tells me I'm good. So it can't be me that's out of step. It's got to be the devil coming against me. Could it be? Could it be? And I'm not saying it is, and I'm certainly not pointing fingers, because after all, you have your truth and I have my truth, and so we'll just talk about others. Could it be that the reason marriages are in such trouble is because one or both are living contrary, neglecting the wisdom of God's word as it relates to husband and wife? Could it be that the reason finances are in such shambles and distress and turmoil is because maybe there is one in that scenario who's handling money contrary to? Could it be that the reason there is so much trouble in your health right now is because there have been year after year after year of living contrary to? And when we choose to live contrary to, God, as a gentleman, gives us over to life lived contrary to. And we experience his passive wrath living outside of his covering. Do you understand what I'm saying? Please, I need to reiterate. I'm not saying that everything we go through is because we're living outside of God's standard. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is probably very often that's the case. So here's the solution. You want to know the solution? You want to know the solution? The Lord is with you while you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, what? This is a great verse. And there's some great hope and joy here. And there's some, oh man, seriously? Right here is the way the world works. If you forsake God, live contrary to his standard, what will happen? He will forsake you. He won't abandon you. That's not what it says. It doesn't say that he'll leave you. It doesn't say that he'll abandon you. It doesn't say he'll turn his back on you. It says he will give you over to the life you want to live. And that will bring consequences. Do you understand? This is not, some of you are thinking, well, yeah, that's the Old Testament. Then we had Jesus on the cross, and then he loves us. Right? It's easy. And because he loves me and died for me, I can live how I want to, and he's going to cover me. If that's where you're going, let me share with you this. James. Now, understand that James was the half-brother of Jesus. Not that his parents got divorced and remarried. He wasn't a stepbrother. Came from the same mama, had a different daddy. Jesus' daddy was the Holy Spirit impregnated a Virgin Mary, so God-man. James had the same mommy, different daddy. James' daddy was Joseph. So this is Jesus' half-brother who saw Jesus in the flesh, who didn't believe in Jesus was who he said he was until after the resurrection. And this guy who knew Jesus says this, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. Cleanse your hands, you sinners, and purify your hearts, you double-minded. He knows what it was not to draw near to God. He knows what it was to live contrary to God's standard. He rejected Jesus to his face when he was on earth. And James says, if you draw near to God, God will draw near to you. And if you seek God, he will be found. And if you stay with God, he will stay with you. Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith it's impossible to please God. And those who come to him must believe that he is, and that he rewards those who diligently seek him. You seek God, he will be found. You draw near to him, he will draw near to you. And for many of us, when we live contrary to his standard, we experience trouble, the passive wrath of God. And so as a result, a lot of us living contrary to God's standards, experiencing the passive wrath of God, amassing consequence after consequence after consequence, come to church because we want things to get better, right? Which is okay. However, it's interesting to me how often people neglect this part of it. How few people come to church wanting things to get better with the attitude, I need to get right with Jesus. Most come to church because they want God to fix their issue. Most of us come to God because we want God to fix our mess, rather than coming first to God and saying, God, I need to be right with you. You understand? You okay? When we come to God because we want him to fix our issue, that's okay if before that we want to be right with him. But most come to God just wanting him to fix what's broken, never wanting ourselves to change to be right with him. Most of us want God to fix our mess, but we want him to leave us alone. God, fix my spouse, but leave me alone. Fix my money, but let me spend it how I want. Fix me in this way, but let me keep living how I want to. And it's not that God says, how dare you thus feel my wrath. He says, you can live how you want. I will let you do that. I love you. But if you want me to let you off the leash, I'll let you off the leash. There's going to be consequence. I know that many of you have been asked to pray for others who are in a mess. I know that I am often asked by others for prayer that God would fix their mess, as if I have some magic prayer journal that I write stuff down and God says, all right, Carl, what can I do for you today? Help from heaven will not come if we continue to live outside God's standard in that area. Next week, I'm going to talk to you from the Bible about how to have consequences that you've experienced in your life reversed. Wouldn't that be nice? If we're sitting there going, wait, I thought all this stuff was from the devil. Like God could fix that easy. But now you're saying I might have some responsibility in my consequences? Well, how do I get out of that? Do you know you can? Well, I'm not going to say that. You could put yourself in a position at God's discretion to completely reverse, to limit, or to give you the strength to live with consequence. But if you don't understand what we're going to talk about next week, you're never even going to put yourself in a position for that. But for now, let me tell you the solution, where to start. Where to start right now. If it's not the devil that's your problem, if it's God that's your problem. And only, you'll know if you do a little bit of soul searching and Jesus searching, say, God, is this me? Like, you'll know if there's a part of your life that's living outside of God's standard. You probably know that already. You probably don't even need to pray. You probably know. This part of my marriage, this part of my attitude, this part of my job, this part of my health, this part of my habits, this part of my behavior, this is not contrary with God's standard right here. Like here's what I don't know. If God took your life and wrote in the Bible, be just like Bill, then you know you're right with God. But if he can't say in the Bible, be just like Bill, then you know something is wrong. You understand what I'm saying? Like, you know. The solution in that situation, if your problem is not the devil, if your problem is God, because you've lived outside of God's standard and is experiencing the passive wrath of God, i.e. consequences, where you start right now is what the Bible said. Draw near to God. Then you put yourself in a position for God to repair. See, there's no hope apart from coming to Jesus. And that's the gospel. That's what's called the good news. Not just for eternity, but for repair on earth. Life and life added to life. Eternal life and life added to life. God will draw near to you, but you got to come to him first. See, God took the initiative with Jesus on the cross. And now he waits for us to respond. If you draw near to him, he will be found by you. The only hope for the fix of your mess is to draw close to Jesus. That's the only hope. It's a spiritual thing, because the spiritual always precedes the natural. The spiritual always governs the natural. It's a thing that starts there first in my heart, then fleshes itself out in this world in the midst of my mess. Do you understand what I'm saying? Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay, so here's the thing. And this is where the rubber meets the road. If there is an issue, a struggle, something that is being distressed and destroyed in your life, you know, just like Job knew he was right with God. What was going on in his life was not at the hand of God. You know, if that struggle, if you are completely right with God and that struggle is of the evil one. Or if that area of struggle in your life is you are out of step with God. You know. And if you are out of step with his truth and his standard, quit using earth to try to fix heaven. Draw near to God right now. And put yourself in a position to experience the reversal of consequence. Do you understand? Pray with me.